Roxy, we both live alone, and I take it that both of us are pretty happy.
Yeah, no one to tell me when to do the dishes or when to clean my books up.
So what would it take for you to agree to have a roommate at this point?
I think what I really want is just a neighbor who I know that I could like walk over and knock on the door and be like, hey, I just made this great food. Come enjoy it with me.
Yeah, I think there have been some TV shows about this kind of person. Friends.
Seinfeld. This is the thing, is that the TV shows told me I would have Kramer as my neighbor to come over and eat my cereal.
I think there might be some trade-offs with having Kramer as your neighbor. From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from two single Christian women enjoying living alone most of the time without becoming strange cat ladies. I'm Katelyn Beatty.
And I'm Roxy Stone, and I have a cat.
Many people have commented on how lonely a place New York City can be.
Mark Twain, in fact, has commented on it.
I see we're back to the Mark Twain quotes.
He's been missing all season.
Welcome back.
He said, New York is a splendid desert, a domed and steepled solitude, where the stranger is lonely in the midst of a million of his race.
There are so many people here. You know, you can't go anywhere without seeing people. Like, it doesn't matter if it's in the dead of night, you'll run into people. And yet,
right,
sometimes that feels lonelier than if you were all alone.
It is. It's weird. It's a unique pain to be around so many people, yet they don't really know you, and they can walk by without even looking at you, and you can feel lonelier maybe than even just if you were with one person, or even sometimes even if you were just by yourself. Mm-hmm. I've been crying, in public before and nobody said anything. And in some ways that's nice because you're like, oh, I can just go ahead and cry and nobody's going to bother me about it. But then also you're like, why doesn't anybody care that I'm crying?
I'm sure if you got on the train at like a busy time and you were really loud about it, you'd get a couple looks. Yeah, I've definitely cried in public in New York. I feel like that's kind of a quintessential.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about that.
It's hard to know who your people are, I think, in a place as big as this. Where I lived before in the Chicago suburbs, like, of course, there were times when I experienced loneliness, but if something really came up, I knew who to turn to. In a place like New York, it feels like to see your friends, you really have to plan ahead.
Yeah.
And then in the in-between times, you can feel really isolated.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to do in New York, and it feels like you should be out doing something. And it's like, if you don't have plans with some of your friends out at a Broadway show or seeing a movie or going to a museum or whatever, then maybe nobody likes you or nobody cares about you, or you're just the lonely person in your apartment by yourself,
Yeah. Well, friends, this is depressing. So what's been a New York experience that has really captured this kind of loneliness for you? Beyond the pandemic loneliness, what has really distilled that aloneness for you?
Yeah, I could definitely tell a lot of pandemic stories, but I will go back to before the pandemic. I fell on some stairs. I think this was on Halloween, maybe.
This is why I don't like Halloween. It's a cursed day.
And I broke my tailbone.
Oh.
Which, if anybody listening has broken their tailbone, they will understand the unique and excruciating pain of that.
Oh.
Your tailbone is connected to like everything in your body. Somehow. Like you blink and your tailbone hurts, it feels like. But it takes a long time to heal. And the first 2 weeks of that, it's hard to get out of bed. Like literally just rolling over in bed is excruciating. And so I was just home and there's nothing they can do for it, right? Like
there's no cast.
Yeah. They can x-ray and tell you it's broken, but they can't do anything about it. It's just a thing that heals on its own. So I just had to be at home because I couldn't go into the office. I couldn't sit in a chair for 2 weeks. And then I had to sit on a donut after that for a while. So it's also kind of a humiliating injury. But I was in so much pain, I couldn't really get up and cook for myself and do things for myself. And I think that was one of the most poignant times of feeling really alone in New York because I really needed people and I didn't have anybody close enough or around enough. It was one time where I was like, I just want a roommate who could like bring me some water and like run to the store and get the toilet paper that I'm out of, you know, like things like that were just really simple that I wasn't going to like call a friend to come get on a subway and come up from Chelsea or Brooklyn and go get me some soup. But I really did need somebody and wanted somebody. And I think this is what a lot of New Yorkers end up doing. I just ended up paying. Like I would just like order stuff to be delivered. And so actually being single and alone is also kind of expensive sometimes.
I mean, aside from paying rent on your own.
You pay rent on your own. You pay like a task rabbit to come build a piece of furniture for you because it takes 2 people or things like that. Or when you're sick to deliver things.
And maybe especially as women, if there's like physical strength involved, which I do not really have any, then you feel like you kind of understand the trope of like, we just need a man around here. For some reason that person talks like that. I don't even know what accent that was. But like, you know, somebody with like physical strength who can just be there to help.
Yeah.
Because there are certain things that I can't do on my own. Like I had to get a new mattress several months ago and I live on the 4th floor of a 4-story walk-up, and there was just no way that I could carry a mattress up on my own, and I had to get rid of my old one, so I like paid someone. I paid a TaskRabbit, a dude, to come over and just take my old mattress to the curb.
Yeah.
And I was like, I guess this is what it means to be a single independent woman, is like, I'm just shelling out money for handyman.
I know. It's a little ridiculous. There's times of feeling helpless, and that's frustrating. And then there's times of feeling lonely, and sometimes one will lead to the other, where I start to really spiral. Like, nobody cares about me. Nobody loves me. Nobody even remembers that my tailbone is broken and I'm in bed right now. I'm probably going to die here alone and nobody's going to know for weeks. And then my cat might eat me. You know, that's the spiral.
So we went from I'd really like somebody to watch this TV show with me to my cat is going to eat my corpse.
Yeah, this is the darkness of loneliness.
That is a spiral. I do think that's probably one of the big differences about like living alone and maybe feeling a little bit isolated, but it doesn't become an occasion for negative self-talk. It's like, I know people love me. I know people think about me and care about me. And I'm just spending a night alone like everybody does, versus a loneliness that kind of reflects back lies about your self-worth or your value, what you mean to other people. And certainly I've gone through periods of time here where I haven't heard from people. I haven't heard from friends for a while, but then I resist being the one to reach out because then I'm insecure about, am I always the one that has to reach out? And if that's true, does that mean that that person doesn't care about the friendship as much as I care about it? So I resonate with how loneliness can become more than just being alone. It can become a kind of, it can lead to self-doubt and insecurity.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of information out, a lot of people talking right now about the dangers of loneliness and the escalation of loneliness, and medical professionals recognize like people do die sooner when they live alone or when they experience loneliness. There's like escalated rates of suicide. There's all kinds of health issues that can be associated with loneliness. So I don't think it's something that we just can shrug off or just say, oh, there's something wrong with, it's just me and I'm just feeling lonely. I just need to buck it up and be stronger or quit worrying about whether people like me. Like, I think there's real consequences to both being alone and then feeling lonely, especially over time.
Right. It's not just an individual problem. It's a systemic problem that has significant costs on a societal level.
Yeah. So I think it's, especially when we're talking to Christians and when we're talking to church leaders, I think this is something people have to in those positions need to be thinking about as they think about, oh, there are probably more and more people in my congregation who are lonely.
Mm-hmm. I will say on a positive note, I have found going to church in New York City to be a less lonely experience than being part of churches in the past that were very family oriented, because in New York and other major cities, it's definitely more common for people to be single for longer stretches of time, to attend church by themselves, to live alone. There's a way in which it doesn't feel as odd.
Yeah. Speaking of church in New York City, we thought it would be fun to bring on our favorite priest from New York. Hot priest! Who we've had on the podcast before. You loyal listeners will remember. Welcome back, Ben.
Good to be back. Hot priest! Here we go.
How have you experienced New York, and when it comes to combating loneliness versus feeling connected to other people?
I think I've been really lucky. I talked to other clergy in other areas of the country who are pretty lonely, or maybe their congregation isn't their age, or for whatever reason. But my congregation welcomed me with open arms, and so I've thankfully just really not had the experience that some of my peers. I'm in some of those Facebook groups for just clergy.
Oh, those.
And some of them talk about loneliness quite a bit. And I feel bad a lot of times because I can't relate. I don't feel that bad. But a lot of people who actually take the time to make a meeting with me tend to be pretty lonely.
Oh, really? That's a common thing that you hear when people come to you and want sort of a pastor to talk to. They are coming to you out of a place of loneliness or seeking pastoral guidance on that?
It actually tends to be people who don't actually come, or who rarely come. Folks who wake up to panic attacks at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're kind of wondering about their life. They're wondering, I make a lot of money and my career is kind of sort of the way I want it, or not. So that's a pretty recurring theme for sure.
And friends that people make in New York can feel really transient. You can't get too attached to people because they might drift off, in 3 to 5 years.
Totally. My first year, 2 years here, I became friends with all the people who left. So I asked some of my long-term New Yorker friends, what's the tell? Is there a tell whether someone's going to stick around or whether they're peacing out? And everybody just kind of laughed at that. But I was really looking for an answer. But I don't know about you guys, but I felt like I was lonelier when I was in middle school and high school. Just being a Christian in the Northeast, that was pretty weird. You were by default, by definition, uncool.
Aw. I was a dork for different reasons in high school, primarily because I was in marching band. But marching band is where the dorks come together and really form a bond.
Right.
And they amass their power to take over.
I wanted to be more lonely in high school, I think. Or more
Roxy
alone
was super
in high
popular.
school.
That was a little humble brag right there.
It's not that. It's that when you're in a really small town, everyone knows you. Everyone knows your business. So it's just getting to be by yourself is actually kind of a hard thing in a small town.
Well, I think what you're describing is anonymity.
Yeah.
Which you can find in abundance in New York. New York is the only place I've ever lived where I never felt weird about going to a restaurant by myself. That is such a common thing here. No one would bat an eye. When I lived in the suburbs, it was just one?
I know that just one.
Shut up.
Someone in the restaurant goes and sits next to you because they feel bad for you.
I am here alone on purpose.
Yes, I enjoy that. So I think if you like being alone, which I do oftentimes, it can be great. It's just, you can only be alone for so long. And then you realize I need deep connection. I need deep friendship. And I think maybe this is just the reality of being an adult, is that you realize that friendships don't just happen. You have to make an intentional effort to keep them going.
Totally. I think over the past year and a half, too, especially last year, when we were just all shut down here in New York. They might not have been in Florida or Austin or wherever, but a bunch of parishioners didn't realize how lonely they were. And I don't know how to say this nicely, but kind of started acting out or losing their minds a little bit. Just, you can, I'm an introvert. I like my alone time, but when it's too long, when I'm locked up in my studio forever. You can't blame people for going a little crazy. I mean, I know I would have. I also think like there's a lot we can learn from people who, for whatever reason, are celibate and are committed to it. Most of the people I meet, monks, nuns, just people who have committed to celibacy, they're not unaware that they need deep intimacy, and they're not going to get it from a partner. And I think they have a lot to teach us, because I think we put way too much weight on our significant others, and they cannot carry that burden, no matter how in sync you are with your partner. So yeah, you need other people, and I think a lot of times these folks are on the forefront of showing us just what that might look like. Because most of the monks and the nuns and the celibate people I meet are, of course, go through periods of loneliness, but aren't like particularly lonely the way a lot of my friends are who are looking for that significant other.
Well, thanks for joining us again, Ben DeHart. We're always glad to have you on and to hear a little mini sermon. I do feel like we got a little mini sermon.
I can't help it.
I'm
I'm sorry.
And for listeners who would like to know where else they can listen to you sermonize, where should they turn?
Our Triune Pod. We're going from devotionals on prayers to devotionals on the Psalms. So it's me and my best friend from college. We have a lot of fun. I hope you will too.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it. Well, we're excited about today's guest. She is a fellow single Christian woman in her 30s, and she's written quite a bit about the experience of loneliness and also some tips for transforming it.
Ekemini Uwan is a co-host of the Truths Table podcast, a public theologian, and co-author of the upcoming Truths Table book out next year.
There just seems to be like this epidemic of loneliness. I think we've seen, a bunch of op-eds about this, studies about how loneliness is just ravaging our society, regardless of our relationship, status.
Our conversation with Ekemini is coming up just after the break. Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
Get the news on the views in the pews.
And if you like what we're doing at Saved by the City, let us know. Throw us a rating or review. It goes a long way toward helping get the word out about the show.
I don't know if you guys know this, but Ed Stetzer, he loves us. He tweets about us. He talks to his friends about us. So be like Ed, y'all.
Be like Ed. You can also email us at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we will reply, just like we replied to Ed.
Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Ekemini. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's great to have you on.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So we didn't have you here to talk about singleness, but we probably will get into that. And I believe that all three of us are single Christian women living in cities, professionally oriented, and in our late 30s, I want to say.
Yeah, correct.
So, because we've thought a lot about singleness, and we probably have absorbed a lot of attitudes about what singleness means in the church, do you think it's the case that single people are more lonely than married people? Why or why not?
There just seems to be like this epidemic of loneliness. I think we've seen, a bunch of op-eds about this, and studies about how loneliness is just ravaging our society, regardless of our marital status or relationship, status. Of course, if you're going to make comparisons between married people and single people, I think we have to go on a case-by-case basis. I know that there's plenty of married people that I know who feel deeply alone. But then I think also for single people, particularly those who have had to go through and who are still currently navigating the complexities of being in a pandemic and not having a manual on how to do that as a single. I think there's a deep and profound loneliness that a lot of singles have felt liberty to express. They don't have somebody to quarantine with, right? When we were quarantining, or just feeling deep isolation, especially before the vaccines rolled out, right? So you really were a little scared or more scared of gathering and congregating with other people, just for the sake of having some sort of social life and just some fellowship with other people. And so I do think that it's been exacerbated by lots of external forces, obviously the pandemic, but I'd also say social media. I don't think that's helping us, right?
Yeah.
I think it's exacerbating just our own proclivity toward comparison. And so it's hard to say whether single people are more, lonely than married people, or married people are more lonely than single people. I think loneliness is it's endemic in our society right now.
Why do you think that is? I agree with you. I've seen, more conversations about the loneliness epidemic. There was the whole Bowling Alone book. Like, what do you think it is in our society that's exacerbating loneliness or creating a sort of system of loneliness?
Yeah, well, I think that there's just a societal breakdown. I think there's just institutions that we used to be able to, maybe bank on, never perfect, but that we could bank on, look to, that we just don't trust for legitimate reasons because of things that have happened and transpired, right? And so, or things that are being uncovered, injustices that are taking place. So even if you just think about the church, just the ways that people are speaking about the abuses they've experienced, the traumas that they've experienced. And I'm a church woman. I love the church. I serve the church. I'm in the church. So I speak from a place of love, but I think that in some ways that built-in network of fellowship, I think, is not as readily available for people in the ways that it had been maybe many years ago. The ways that the economy is shaped now, where a lot of jobs, in order to get a job, you kind of just have to open up your search range. So you have to be willing to move out of maybe your hometown, right? Or your home state, moving away from family and moving into maybe a city in order to secure employment. And so you're away from your family, you're away from your kinship network that you had. And so that also contributes to loneliness. And then if you're older, if you're in your 30s, it's harder to make friends.
Yes, it is.
So there's a lot of things that I think are contributing to the loneliness that we feel, right? And then I think social media, in some ways we're connected, but we're disconnected. And so it has us in silos where we're just scrolling every day. So you only see the glossy part of our lives. You don't see, maybe the struggles and the tossing and turnings. And that's our own prerogative on what we want to share or divulge on social media. But I do think that in some ways it's hampered our ability to really make strong social connections.
Well, I definitely resonate with the sense that social media, on one hand, seems to connect you with similar-minded people. You can get on it every time. You can have this like chatty interaction, and that it almost is a simulated kind of intimacy or connection.
Yeah.
But of course, no one on Twitter is checking in with me if I'm sick and I need someone to come bring me medicine or soup, or, they don't know and see my day-to-day life. And actually not many people do. I think I love living in a city, but I definitely feel far away from family and close friendship. And it just takes so much more effort to connect with people. Going back to the pandemic for you, we're still in it, not totally out of it, but kind of in the worst or most intense months. What was your experience as a single person, and how did you deal with those profound feelings of disconnection? What were some like practical ways to deal with those feelings?
It was just really shocking. Yeah, it was just a really odd experience. And so I'm really grateful. I actually, right before the pandemic hit, I actually moved in with a family member, and I'm glad that I did, because it would have been really difficult for me to have to navigate the pandemic by myself as someone who's been living on their own. And it was kind of like, oh my goodness, like, so what does this mean for, like, as a single person, my career, what I'm doing, like, what will this look like now, like in this pandemic and maybe post-pandemic? What does my love life look like, which was, not quite on an upward trajectory anyway. And you're like, wow, so this is not going to help, I don't think, but God can do anything. And so so you're just thinking about all these different factors lives and how will I, make ends meet? So it was just a flood of like, I guess you could say anxiety riddled thoughts of like, how am I going to make it? And of course God did provide and has pivoted and I would say shifted my career in some ways that I think are good and positive. One thing that helped me during the pandemic was joining a prayer line. And so we prayed at 7 a.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday from like 7 until 7:45-ish or so. That was really grounding. Really helped me.
Every single
really
day
stabilizing.
of the
That's
week.
cool.
Monday through Friday.
Wow.
So I found myself doing those spiritual disciplines, that's also helped to continue to anchor me. Keeping up my exercise routine, that is something that's always been constant. I just felt like because everything was so out of control, I had to try to get bearings on like, what can I control? And being with family, I'm not going to act like that's not a big deal. That really helped me. Definitely.
I think a lot of us learned how to be more comfortable in solitude, and maybe even some healthy ways of doing, like maybe some ways we needed to disconnect.
Yes.
What do you think is the difference between loneliness and solitude? Like the difference between a good kind of aloneness and the damaging hard kind?
I think the difference is kind of agency. When I hear solitude, I think about agency. It's like I'm choosing to steal away for this moment, or I'm choosing to say no to this opportunity because of my own, either it doesn't align with what I want to do, or I need to be able to have some time, to nourish myself, to build in some emotional capacity, bandwidth, to do maybe to tend to myself before I can say yes. Whereas I think loneliness, I want to say there's like external factors, that contribute to that loneliness that if you had the agency and the power to change it, you would not choose that. It doesn't feel good. And if there was some way I could change this, I would want to. And this is the way I would like to shape my life.
There were ways, I think, before the pandemic that I felt overstretched and like so much was going on, and then I think it was the pandemic had some correctives in that way, and then it went too far. And then it was like, okay, I'm just alone all the time. And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
When you talked about that in the agency versus just having that choice made for you, I think my follow-up question to that was, well, when you do feel lonely, can you transform that into the good kind of solitude? How do you approach that?
I think you have to try to locate yourself in that feeling of loneliness, to be like, asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? Is it that I need to be around, some other human beings, to recharge my energy, to feel connected? What would help?
There was like a month ago where I was like, I'm feeling really disconnected, and I'm pretty introverted. I live by myself most of the time. I'm happy to live by myself, and I realized it had been an entire week since I had face-to-face contact with someone besides like a cashier. This just isn't humanly healthy. I need
Absolutely.
Even if it's like small talk, even if it's not super deep, like I need some kind of in-person connection with a friend.
Yes.
I think what's hard about loneliness is when it can kind of start to spiral, where it feels connected to these like deeper questions about your own worth, or like, do people remember me? Like, why won't anybody text me? I don't want to be the one to reach out. Like, it's connected to deeper desires of wanting to be known, wanting to be remembered, wanting to feel like my presence matters to other people. And, you can get into a bad place where you don't feel like you have the energy to address the loneliness, and you find other coping mechanisms, some that are good, like exercise is great, prayer is great. Others of us found other forms of coping during the pandemic that weren't so great. And then you learn, actually, drinking a couple glasses of wine doesn't actually address the loneliness. It just numbs you to the feeling.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Just hypothetically, not that I did that, but like I heard others do that.
No, that's a good point, though. You're right. There are some habits that people have taken on that maybe aren't so great for us, right? Physically and things like that. Loneliness does begin to lie to us, right? About our worthiness. It can really begin to eat away at us, right? And so we can try to turn down the volume of that accusatory voice with alcohol, with weed, with sex,
with social media, with binging,
with there's drugs,
with Hinge.
Pick your vice. But I do think the loneliness thing is the communal aspect. We just don't have those communal ties the way that we've had many years ago. Our community can help keep us in check, I think, if we have a good community.
Yeah. So on that note about community, you'd mentioned like the role of institutions, including the church,
right?
That 20, 30 years ago, more Americans were kind of committed to these larger institutions, larger bodies. I think we are all here committed to the church, going to church. We are connected to a church community. I think Roxy and I have both had mixed experiences in the church as single people. Especially if you're in a church that is a little more family oriented, or a lot of your age peers are just in a different season of life. So what has your experience in the church been like, Ekemini, and what do you need churches to know about you as a single person regarding the potential for loneliness?
Yeah. Goodness. So what's interesting is that now that we're in the pandemic, my church, we still have not come together in person yet. That's tough. As a single person, especially if you join the church right before the pandemic, like I did. And so you don't know, so you don't really know people, and they don't really know you yet. And that's nobody's fault. But I would say prior to that, I think my experience in the church, it's been, it's been mixed. When we talk about singleness, particularly when it comes to me being a Black woman who is single, I talk about this in the Truth Table book.
That's coming out.
It's coming out in
a little plug. It's coming out in April.
Yes, April,
and is
2022.
It called Truth Table. What is the subtitle?
Yeah, Truth Table: Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation.
Oh, it's going to be so good.
Yes, God willing. And so, so I have a chapter in there called "Hidden in Plain Sight: A Single Black Woman's Manifesto," and it's the longest chapter. I have a lot to say.
We got a lot to say.
When it comes to, at least me, singleness as a Black woman, I know full well that there are systemic factors that have gone into why I am a single Black woman. Why I'm not the only, I'm the only one, right? Mass incarceration is a big one, right? And you just think about just the marriageability pool for Black women. It's just not good. And then you think about just the fact that Black women tend to be the least desired, even when we are in the marriageability pool. And so there's a lot of different factors that are outside of my control with regard to singleness. And so I think we take it for granted as something that's just naturally going to happen. That has not been the case. There have been some church contexts where I don't think they've really reckoned with the systemic impacts of these dynamics that have gone on that have been designed really to attack and destroy the Black family in this country. But I think because there are so many single Black women in, say, the Black church context, there's not been so much of a shame or stigma attached to being single. I'm not saying that's the case across the board for all Black churches. I'm not saying that at all. I've seen where me being a single woman who has been a single for a long while, right? And who is also public, I've seen where sometimes the pastor is deeply insecure about that for whatever reason. And so I've seen where the pastor is in some sort of weird pseudo competition where they ward themselves off from you for fear of, okay, maybe this
perception.
I know that one.
Okay, whatever this perception is, or this fear of being, alone with a single woman, it's just, it's rooted in a lot of sexism and a lot of misogyny, truthfully. And I think we have to call that what it is. And then I've had, some contexts where my calling and what I do is embraced fully and cultivated and nourished and nurtured. Obviously, that's the ideal scenario. But so there's been a whole lot of different experiences that I've had with regard to my singleness in the church. How about you all?
I think I've had a lot of different experiences too. Several mirror what you've described. Maybe until I moved to New York City, I was mostly in churches where they were just very family oriented. And so, so much of the life of the church was built around family ministries, family gatherings, like things that you kind of felt on the outside of as a single person. Since moving to New York, it's different because so many more people are single single later.
Yes.
In previous churches where there was a lot of orientation around families, I think it would have been easier to deal with if there hadn't also been a kind of theological framing of marriage as like the best blessing, or the thing that God intends for every good Christian. Or the thing that is coming to you if you just learn contentment now in this season. Even though nobody said this explicitly, it felt like I was like a lesser Christian or something because I wasn't married with kids.
Yes. I mean, I think it's important for, whoever is listening, particularly church leaders, pastors, if they're listening, to know that single people in your congregations, that we are people to be loved, not people to be fixed.
You mentioned earlier, like it is harder to make friends the older you get.
It is.
So any tips or tricks on how to make
friendships
make friends as you get older? How do we tell us how we can make friends?
I think we do have to be a little, we have to be willing to be vulnerable, to put ourselves out there. The primary way that I made my friends, I have always made my friends post-college, was through my church. And so I think you have to be able to step out and be willing to open yourself up to the possibility of rejection. I hate rejection. It's something that's deeply intimate. Sometimes on the other side of that courage and that vulnerability is a beautiful budding friendship that awaits, But I know it can be scary. But why is it that we're willing to take those leaps when it comes to like romantic relationships, but we're not always willing to take those leaps when it comes to platonic friendships? That's actually what's going to last. I talk about how friendship is eschatological. We will have friends in glory. Like marriage is not going to last, between husband and wife. That's not going to last. We're not going to be married, to one another in glory, but we will have friends. Jesus is our friend. And so I think we don't put enough respect on friendship. So I say, put yourself out there, show yourself kind and friendly. If somebody, is trying to maybe perhaps build a friendship, be receptive to that. Or you yourself put yourself out there. If you see somebody that's like, they're really a cool person, I should get to know them, at a deeper level than just maybe exchanging DMs or whatever, and really just begin to get to know that person. So you got to put yourself out there. We can't get around it.
No, yeah. Any kind of intimacy and connection requires risk, is what I hear you saying.
Yes. And you never know how that risk will pay off.
Yes,
and it will be rewarded, I should say.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable with us, Ekemini.
Yes.
And for these like tips and reminders that friendship is the thing we're headed toward, and is, if we're lucky in this life, we'll get friends that last a lifetime. So for those listeners who want to learn more about Ekemini, where can they find you?
Well, thank you all so much for having me on this show. Your listeners can follow me on Twitter at Sista_Theology and on Instagram at Sista Theology. And then you can also listen, to the podcast I co-host called Truth Table. And you can follow our podcast on Instagram at Truth Table, and Twitter is the same handle as well. And then the book that I mentioned, Truth Table, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation, will be out in April in time for Resurrection Sunday. And so you can pre-order.
Perfect.
You can pre-order that book now on bookshop.org and really wherever books are sold. So thank you all for having me. Thank you, Roxy. Thank you, Katelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been talking about how hard it is to make friends as an adult. So have you made any recently? Like in the last year, say? Have you made any new friends, Katelyn?
Well, I think we've become better friends.
Yes.
That's not really making a new friend. Like, I can't check that off the list, but
no.
Recently, I noticed another like single Christian woman in New York that I knew through a mutual friend on Instagram. She was like liking some of my posts, and I thought she was like fun and charming. And so I messaged her and was like, hey, would you ever want to go get a drink? It really did feel like asking someone out. Like it was the same kind of nervousness. I slid into her DMs, but I was like, I like her vibe, you know, and I feel like we'd have stuff to talk about. And so she happened to be in Brooklyn several weeks ago. And yeah, we just met up and had a couple drinks and had a really good conversation about living here and church and where we grew up and family. And it feels like, it does really feel like, I don't know where it's going to go, you know, but like, it was a good exercise in realizing that people are open to making new friends and it's worth the risk. And a lot of people are probably more eager than you give them credit for. Like, don't assume that everybody just has their group and is too busy. Like, err on the side of assuming that everybody wants a new friend. Everybody wants another friend. Have you made any friends?
Yeah. I made a friend. I started a book group through my church, but it was during the pandemic, so it was all virtual. And one of the people that joined, we've become friends. Unfortunately, she lives in Los Angeles, which is a little bit of a bummer. Hey, Alex. But yeah, we became friends, and she's actually been in New York maybe 3 times since the pandemic, so we've hung out. But she introduced me to a friend of hers who lives in New York, who lives literally across the street from me. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we've hung out a few times, and that's been fun, and it's exciting to maybe have that like potential of to bring it full circle, a Kramer across the street. And I'm sorry, Faith, that I called you Kramer.
You know, I really hope that you never break your tailbone again, because it sounds terrible. But if you do, this person could be the like, go get me some soup person.
Yes. Soup delivery. Saints by the City is a religion news service production. The producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. We get production assistance from Elizabeth Joy Wyndham.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Roxy Stone.
And Caitlin Beatty.
And I have a cat. And a dog.
That wasn't a dig. As I'm laughing maniacally, it's so convincing.